So think about the last time your manager gave you a positive review. They said things like, "You're a good asset to the team. Your work on that project was excellent. We couldn't have hit that deadline without you." And you walked out of that meeting feeling so genuinely good, didn't you? But then 2 weeks later, you're sitting at your desk doing the same job for the same salary, and it starts to sting just a little bit. Not because the praise wasn't real, because it was real, and it didn't translate into anything. So you told yourself the same thing you've been telling yourself for months, maybe even years. They know I'm good. When the time is right, they're going to take care of me. Listen, your manager's not sitting in their office calculating the gap between what you're worth and what you're making. It's not their job. That's your job. Welcome to the Drew Chaz Podcast, a podcast built for introverts with big goals and busy minds. I'm your host, Drew, and around here, we don't silence our thoughts, we sharpen them. Every week, I give you the mindset frameworks, clarity formulas, and quiet power strategies that help deep thinkers move forward without pretending to be louder, bolder, or more extroverted than they really are. If you're ready to turn overthinking into clarity, turn hesitation into action, and build success your way, you're in the right place. So let's get into it. So today we're going to do that job together. And I'm going to show you exactly how corporate introverts build the case, anchor the conversation, and ask for what they are worth. Not aggressively, not awkwardly, but clearly, directly, and in a way that feels completely authentic to who you are. Here's the most expensive belief a corporate introvert can hold: that good work automatically converts into fair compensation. Well, hate to tell you, but it doesn't. And the longer you hold that belief, the more you're going to quietly pay for it every single month. Welcome to the Drew Chaz Podcast. I'm Drew, and we're now deep into what I'm calling the Quiet Authority series. And if you've been following along, you already have the 30-day Quiet Authority framework, the 5-people map, the Quiet Voice framework, and the Leadership Identity Reset. Each one of these episodes was building towards this exact moment. Because here's the truth about quiet authority. It's not just about being seen and respected. It's about being compensated for the value you bring. Seen, valued, and paid. That is the full arc. And today we're going to get to that paid part. Now, I want to be honest with you about something before we even go any further. The raise conversation is the one that trips up corporate introverts more than almost any other professional situation. And it's not because they lack the value to justify it, and it's not because they don't deserve it, but because of something that runs much deeper than confidence. That belief is costing you real money every single month. It sits unchallenged. And today we're going to challenge it, and we're going to replace it with a strategy that works for the way your mind actually operates. By the end of this episode, you're going to have 3 things. First, you're going to have a clear understanding of the psychology behind why introverts avoid salary conversations, including the specific fear that most career coaches never name directly. And second, it's the 3-part RAISE framework. This is not a generic negotiating strategy. It's built specifically for how corporate introverts think, prepare, and communicate. Evidence first, anchoring second, and ask third. And then thirdly, the exact sentence to use when you walk into that meeting. Not vague talking points, but actual sentences you can rehearse, personalize, and deliver in a way that sounds like you and not like a script. And then there's one more thing. A lot of people are going to tell you that asking for a raise is not about confidence, that you just need to be bolder, push harder, advocate for yourself more loudly. Well, that advice is built for extroverts. Most corporate introverts were taught explicitity or implicity. That's asking for things as a form of arrogance. That the right way to advance is to work so hard and so well that the organization comes to you. That asking feels like pressure, like bragging, like you're somehow declaring yourself more important than the work. The approach I'm about to give you is built for introverts. It's quieter, more methodical, more thoroughly prepared, and in many cases, more effective because it's designed around your natural strengths instead of fighting against them. Let me describe a scenario that I've heard from corporate introverts more times than I can count. You've been in your role for somewhere between 18 months and 3 years. You started strong, you learned fast, you took on responsibilities that weren't officially yours because the team needed it, and you could do it. You solved problems quietly, and you delivered things that required way more skill than your job description suggested. And your manager knows it. In one-on-ones, they'll tell you. In reviews, they document it. When your team is struggling, they come to you because they know you'll think it through carefully and give them something real. But here is where it breaks down. Every time you get close to having the compensation conversation, something stops you. It might be the company had a tough quarter, or your manager seems stressed about something unrelated. Or you tell yourself that bringing up money feels transactional, like you're reducing your contribution to a dollar amount. So what do? You wait. And the months pass, and your salary stays flat. And the gap between what you're worth on the open market and what you're making grows a little wider every single month. Think about that for a second. You're protecting your manager from a conversation they're professionally equipped to have, a conversation that's literally part of their job, and you're doing it at a financial cost to yourself. Well, that's not quiet authority. That's quiet self erasure. I want to give you a completely different framework for what this conversation actually is. Asking for a raise is not asking for a favor. It's not making a demand. It's bringing a business case to a business conversation. And you're not asking your manager to like you more. You're presenting evidence of market value and contribution and inviting a discussion about alignment. That is a professional conversation, and you're completely equipped to have it. So here's what's actually happening in those moments when you pull back. And you're not being humble. You're not being patient. You're managing your manager's emotion on their behalf and paying for that service with your own income. So before we get into the framework, I want to spend a few minutes on the psychology because if you don't understand why you avoid this conversation, the tactics alone won't be enough to get you into that room. There's three specific fears that drive avoidance for corporate introverts, and most people only name one. I'm going to name all three. So fear number one, the fear of rejection. This one is obvious, and if you ask and they say no, that sting is real. And for introverts who have been preparing and rehearsing internally for weeks before any conversation, rejection doesn't feel like just a no. It feels like a verdict on the case you spent so much energy building. Here's what I want you to understand about rejection in a raise conversation. A no is almost never final. It's almost always conditional. Not right now, or not at this moment, or let's revisit in 2 quarters is not a rejection. It's information. Information you can use to make the next conversation even more effective. The introvert who asks and hears no is in a significantly better position than the introvert who never asks because they never know exactly what conditions need to be met. That is strategic intelligence you just can't get any other way. So fear number two is the fear of being seen as ungrateful. This one runs deep in introverts, particularly those who care deeply about relationships and being seen as collaborative rather than demanding. The internal script sounds something like this. They've invested in me and they've been supportive. Asking for more money might make them think I'm not satisfied, that I'm looking around, and that I don't appreciate what I have. But I want to challenge that narrative directly. And your manager is an adult professional who manages compensation conversations as part of their role. And they don't interpret a well-prepared, respectful ask as ungrateful. They interpret it as someone who knows their value and knows how to communicate it. And that is actually a leadership signal. Research from salary.com consistently shows that managers expect their employees to advocate for their own compensation. And many managers actually think less of employees who consistently accept whatever they're given without discussion, not because of judgment, but because it suggests a lack of self awareness. Listen, asking is professional. Not asking is leaving information off the table. Fear number 3 is the fear of damaging the relationship. And this is the most subtle fear and the one I rarely see addressed in career advice. Corporate introverts build deep, genuine relationships at work, and they invest in those relationships carefully. And the fear is that a compensation conversation, especially one that doesn't go well, could introduce a kind of friction that changes the dynamic. What I want you to understand is that this fear almost always overestimates the fragility of the relationship. A manager who genuinely values you does not lose respect for you because you advocated for your compensation. In fact, the opposite is often true. The managers I've spoken to consistently say that they have actually more respect for the employees who come to them with a clear professional case than for the ones who stew in resentment quietly. That quiet resentment, which is what builds when you never ask, is actually what damages relationships over time. The ask rarely does. So let's get into the actual framework. 3 parts: evidence, anchoring, and the ask. But before we go through each one, this framework is designed to be built over time, not assembled the night before you walk into your manager's office. The most effective race conversation happens because the preparation started weeks or months before the meeting. So let me explain why that matters so much. Well, when you prepare the night before, you're working from memory and you're trying to recall contributions while also managing your nerves. And you're doing 3 jobs at once: remembering, organizing, and performing. And that's a recipe for underselling yourself, even when the evidence is strong. But when you prepare over time, you arrive at the conversation with a document, a real document with specific entries. And suddenly, you're not trying to remember anything and you're simply presenting what you already built. And that starts the entire energy of the meeting. So, starting right now, not the week before your next review, I want you to open a document and begin building what I call your evidence document. I mean, it's barely June. You have until the end of the year to come up with all of this evidence and create this document so that you can go into that meeting with confidence. Your evidence document has one job, and that's to make the gap between what you were hired to do and what you actually do completely undeniable. Here's the situation: 3 columns, what you were hired to do, what you've actually delivered, and the gap between those 2 things. In the first column, pull your original job description. That document tells you exactly what the role was scoped to require. For the second column, write down every contribution you've made over the past 12 months that went beyond the scope. And be specific, not from, I improved the onboarding process. I rebuilt the client onboarding process from a 14-step manual sequence to a 5-step. The fear of damaging the relationship by asking is almost always larger than the actual risk. The thing that damages relationships over time is not asking and slowly building the kind of quiet disengagement that shows up in your work before you even notice it yourself. Automated workflow that reduces average onboarding time by 3 weeks and eliminated the most common source of client support tickets in Q3. Now, that specifically is everything. It converts a vague claim into a verifiable business impact. And verifiable business impact is what makes a compensation conversation close. So for the third column, the gap, you're asking, given what I was hired to do versus what I actually do, what is the honest description of my current role scope? In many cases for corporate introverts, that gap is significant. They were hired as a coordinator and they were functionally operating as a project manager. And they were hired as an analyst and they're leading cross functional work streams. They were hired for one department and they're embedded in three. That gap isn't just evidence of your growth, it's evidence of your market value. And then there's anchoring. This is the part of the raise conversation that most introverts skip entirely, and it's costing them thousands of dollars every year. Anchoring is a psychological principle that the first number introduced into a negotiation creates a gravitational pull on everything that follows. Every offer, counteroffer, and compromise in the conversation will reference the first number, whether the people in the room consciously realize it or not. And this is well documented in negotiation research going back decades. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that the party who introduces the first anchor in a salary negotiation achieves outcomes that are on average 15 to 20% higher than the party who waits for the other side to open. But most introverts wait. They walk in, present their evidence, and then look at their managers to respond with a number. And whatever number comes back, even if it's low, becomes the reference point for everything that follows. So here's my advice of what you should do instead. So before the meeting, research your market value using various sources, LinkedIn salary data, filtered by your specific role, title, and experience years, Glassdoor salary data for your industry and company size, and if possible, salary survey data from industry associations relevant to your field. You're looking for the honest range for someone doing the work you are actually doing and not for the work your job description says you should be doing. Because remember, there is likely a gap there. Price the role you're performing, not the role you were hired to perform. Let me say that one more time. Price the role that you are currently performing, not the role that you were hired to perform. And once you have that range, you anchor 10 to 15% above the midpoint of what you generally want to land at. And it's not because you're greedy. It's because you're understanding anchoring. Your evidence document is not a list of things you did. It's a business case. It exists to answer one question before your manager even asks it. Given everything this person has delivered, does that current compensation accurately reflect their contribution? The document makes the answer totally undeniable. Because you know the conversation will move from the first number and you want that movement to land where you actually belong, not below it. So here's the part introverts often push back on, and this does not make you aggressive or entitled. It just makes you informed. Your manager anchors numbers in their head all the time. Your peers who have negotiated their salaries already introduced anchors, whether they knew what that word meant or not. You're not gaming the system. You're participating in it with your eyes wide open. So now you have your evidence document, you have your anchored number, and now we talk about the actual conversation. I want to address something real quick here. Most advice about salary conversations focus almost entirely on what to say. Well, I want to spend equal time on when to say it and how to create the right conditions for the conversation. Because for introverts, context matters enormously. The right time is not the end of a performance review. By that point, your manager has already mentally closed the meeting and is not in a generative open mindset. The right time is a dedicated one on one that you request specifically for this purpose. You book the meeting, you send a brief agenda note in advance saying, I'd like to discuss my current compensation and career trajectory. That note does two things. It respects your manager's time by not ambushing them, and it signals that this is a professional conversation that you're initiating. And this frames your authority before you walk in that door. Now, the structure of the conversation itself. You open. Don't wait for your manager to lead. Use the same principles that we've talked about in the past. The person who sets the frame controls the narrative. Your opening sentence should be something like this. I appreciate you making time for this, and I want to talk about my compensation and how it aligns with the work I've been doing. and the value I've been delivering. And this is the most important. You move immediately into your evidence. Over the past 12 months, I've taken on responsibility that goes significantly beyond my original role. And here are the three specific areas where I want to walk you through what I've delivered. Then you walk through your three strongest evidence document entries. Not all of them. Three specific, outcome connected, and concise. Then you anchor. Based on market research for this role, scope, and experience level in our market, I've found that the compensation range is between X and Y. And I'm currently at the bottom of that range for what I'm actually delivering. Then go in for the ask. I'd like to discuss adjusting my compensation to Z. And then you stop talking. The silence after the ask is the most powerful moment in the entire conversation. And it may seem awkward, but it has that power. And your instinct as an introvert will be to fill that silence, to qualify, to explain, to soften. Don't do it. The silence is working and it's placing the responsibility for a response where it belongs with your manager. Every word you said after the ask reduces its power. Say the number, stop talking, let the room breathe. Your manager is going to respond. They might ask questions about your research. They might need time to consult HR or their own manager. They might say yes or offer a partial adjustment or give you a timeline. Whatever they say, your next move is to listen completely before responding. And don't react to the first thing they say. Take it in. Then respond to the substance, not the surface. If they say no outright, your question is, I understand, but what would need to be true for us to revisit this conversation next quarter? That question does something important. It refuses to accept no as a permanent answer. It asks your manager to co author the conditions for a yes, and it positions you as someone who is thinking about their career strategically, which is exactly how you want to be perceived. So, as a quick win challenge, you don't need to have the conversation this week. You just need to start the document because the document changes everything. It changes how you feel walking in. It changes what you say. It changes the outcome. Just start it today, even if your conversation is 3 months away. So before we close, let me bring this together. The reason corporate introverts are consistently underpaid is not because they lack value. It's because they have a deeply ingrained belief that value recognized should automatically become value compensated. And that belief is not how organizations work. Organizations compensate the people who advocate for their own compensation quietly, clearly, and professionally. But they do advocate. The introvert who waits to be taken care of is not being humble. They're opting out of a system that requires active participation. So the three-part RACE framework is your system for active participation. Evidence builds the case. Anchoring sets the ceiling high enough that the conversation lands where it should. The ask delivers the numbers clearly and then trusts the silence to do its work. None of this requires you to be aggressive, and none of it requires you to perform a version of confidence you don't feel. It requires prep. It requires clarity and the willingness to sit in the silence after the number lands. You have the preparation, you have the clarity, and now you have the framework. So now we know good work does not automatically become fair compensation. You have to connect those dots in a professional conversation. And there's three fears that keep introverts from asking: fear of rejection, fear of being seen as ungrateful, and the fear of damaging the relationship. All three are larger in your imagination than they are in reality. The evidence document converts vague contributions into verifiable business impact. So build it before the conversation, not during it. Anchoring's not aggression, it's informed participation in a process that's already happening with or without your input. And the ask is just 3 sentences: your evidence summary, your market research, your specific number, then silence. The silence is working. Trust it. A no is almost never final. It's information. Ask what conditions would need to be true for a yes and co-author that path going forward. If you've been listening to this series and thinking, I need all of this in one place with a full depth and the full system, you got to get the promotion playbook, and that's at drewchaz.com. It's available now, and it's so good and detailed. Again, the promotion playbook jumpstart. Go to drewchaz.com/courses and get your course. It takes you step by step on how to get this done. So in conclusion, look, you've earned this conversation, not by being the loudest person in the room, not by performing confidence you don't always feel, but by doing the kind of careful, thorough, meaningful work that the series has been built around. The raised conversation isn't confrontation, it's a presentation. And introverts who over-prepare, who think deeply, who build meticulous cases before they speak are actually designed exactly for this. You just need to get into that room. So start the evidence document today, and that is your only job this week. Remember, your analytical mind is not holding you back. It's your greatest asset when you know how to use it. So until next time, keep thinking deeply, keep moving forward, and most of all, you be you. Listen, if this episode helped you see yourself more clearly, please follow or subscribe to the Drew Chaz Podcast. Leaving a review helps other introverts just find my show, and sharing this episode helps someone else feel less alone in their thinking. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. And remember, you be you.